Welcome to the Wave Strength. Innovative solutions for a secure retirement. Presented by Pacific Life.
And hello, everyone, to another exciting episode of the Wave Strength webinar series. I'm your host, Jim Breen, with Pacific Life's Institutional Division. We have a very exciting episode lined up for you today. So first, I want to thank you for joining us. Also, I want to introduce our guests today. We have Ahmet, Khamil, and Jacquelyn Reardon. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So, Ahmet, you are with Pacific Life, and you're the Director of Products and Partnerships with Pacific Life's Institutional Division. Jacquelyn, you are Head of Client Marketing with Franklin Templeton. So maybe before we begin in today's live event, and we are live just to our audience here, we're very excited to be bringing you this live presentation. But I'd love to hear a little bit about each of your roles. So Jackie, why don't we start with you? Maybe you can shed a little light for our audience today about your role with Franklin Templeton.
Great. So I, as you mentioned, I'm Head of Client Marketing for Franklin Templeton. So I have the pleasure of leading a team across many different channels. So our DC business, insurance, 529, private wealth, and wealth management. So in that role, we're able to partner very closely with partners like Pacific Life, and also our sales partners within the Franklin Templeton system to really figure out what clients need and clients across the whole sort of value chain, whether that be financial professionals, whether that be end investors, whether that be participants today. So we sit in a really interesting spot to kind of help create and drive the strategy of what are the types of tools and resources we should be putting together to help move the business forward.
Wonderful. Well, again, thanks for being with us today. And Ahmet, I would love to hear a little bit about your role with Pacific Life.
Sure, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Very excited to be here. So at Pacific Life, I focus on a few things. One is product and one is partnerships. The product piece is really focusing on bringing some of these great defined contribution lifetime income solutions, which is what we call them, to life. And the second part of that is partnering with great organizations across our ecosystem to bring those solutions to the market and make sure that they get utilized.
Wonderful. And both of you coming from the East Coast out here to sunny California, sunny Southern California. Thanks so much for being here and again, joining us live in the studio. So let's get to it. Our topic of discussion today is retirement and the need for lifetime income. And we've broken this down into three subtopics that we'll get to in a moment, but I just want to share with our audience what we're going to be doing today. So in this live event, we want to engage you, the viewer. We want to encourage you to join us in the discussion. And so we have a couple options for you to do so. We have a chat function. So in your LinkedIn account, you'll see the option to submit questions. We will have a Q&A option here, and we'll want to encourage you to add those questions in. Also, we're going to be implementing a live polling element to this event where you'll be able to join us in a live polling scenario where we'll be able to see feedback from our collective audience and the viewers today in the show. So we'll get to those things in a few moments. But first, let's get into our first subject. We're going to be talking first about American workers and reevaluating how they think about work and what they expect from their workers. But before we hear from you, let's go to people on the street and let's hear what they have to say about this subject. Let's roll the film.
I definitely know I don't have enough to be able to retire. I had a 401k. I didn't take advantage of it. I could have they matched 7%, which I could kick myself. That's free money. Regret I didn't do that. So I really, when it comes to retirement, I'm lacking.
Just my job alone, and 401k is not going to cut it within the next probably 20 years from now. So yeah, it really is putting a plan in place so I can retire at a decent age where I can retire and stay retired and not have to go back to work after retirement.
I'm employed by actually a church, and we do have retirement offered, like a matching up to 6%. So that's actually new in the last year. So I'm learning all about what that even means. I feel like I did a lot more learning than like talking to people that I knew than really sitting through a class or anything like that. So I'm still trying to learn actually. But yeah, I've been told I should put money away as a part of retirement. So I just started doing it in hopes that, in 40 years or whatever, I'm going to benefit from it. So there's that.
In terms of financial retirement, I'm not worried. I feel like we both talk about it all the time, and we help each other with our finances, and we invest in 401ks through our work. We invest in a Roth IRA as well. So
I would say we plan ahead. We're open about it, and we talk about it, and it's part of our relationship. Finances are everything.
A younger self retirement that I wish I would have started my career a little sooner so I could have got going with my retirement sooner. Put away as much as you can. Then on the other hand, you also have to enjoy life a little. So spend a little, save a little. Very important.
Wow. So simple advice, but important advice. Save a little, spend a little, right? So you really get a sense of where people are as we look at those person on the street videos, and a nice cross section of thoughts as it pertains to where people are in their retirement journey. One of the things that we are going to talk about a little bit today, as it pertains to the participant, is a survey that Franklin Templeton has put together. Jackie, something that I think 3 years ago, that it was a bit of your brainchild, that you put this Voice of the American Worker survey together. And I want to encourage our audience, after the webinar, of course, head over to Google and search Franklin Templeton and the Voice of the American Worker survey. It's a great survey with a lot of great information, but maybe you can set the stage a little bit about that survey for us right now, Jackie.
Great. Yeah, it's been such a pleasure to work on this research project, the Voice of the American Worker, and it marries so well to the people on the street, because that's the whole purpose of this research, is to really hear directly from the U.S. employees, participants, and get a sense for how they're feeling. And more importantly, of course, to create a data set. So as you mentioned, we're in our third year of this research study. So now we're able to see some trends, and we're able to kind of glean and figure out what other new topics are important for us to sort of add to the question set, all with the goal for us to provide that research and that data to our partners and to financial professionals, so that we can really engage with the plan sponsor audience, and help employers figure out how best to engage with participants. A lot of the topics that come up are not sort of new ideas or earth-shattering by any means, but very, very important for us to actually go straight to the voice of the American worker and hear them and sort of put that pen to paper.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about what we just saw there, Ahmet?
Absolutely. I agree with everything Jackie has said. The survey, if you haven't read it, like you said, please go and check it out. It's very, very valuable. It definitely jives with everything that we've been hearing in the marketplace over the last decade or so. The voice of the American worker is just that. It's the voice of the person who every day gets up, puts in their work, comes home, and expects their employer to be there to support them in their retirement. So just hearing the folks on the street, looking at the data and what it shows, it's a great indication that these folks are just saying, hey, we just need a little bit of help, right? As I'm nearing retirement and I'm looking to see what that next chapter in my life looks like, I want to look to my employer to be able to help me support that and be able to help facilitate a good retirement for me.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit, because we hear about that opportunity. So we say, okay, retire, have a nice life. Thank you for working for us. Enjoy your retirement. But we need to focus on the journey, right? It's more than just that. Thank you, goodbye. And how can what can we do as an industry to focus more on that, or what is being done? Jackie?
Well, I can share some of the things that have popped up in the survey, which, some of it we hear in the media and the marketplace. I feel like if everyone had a nickel for every time they heard the Great Resignation, we'd probably all be retired ourselves. I think more accurately, I've heard it described as the Great Renegotiation. So I think that right now what's happening, and, whether it's pandemic related or really, I think we would probably all agree that those trends were probably in place. Ahmet mentioned that a lot of these things have been going on for the last decade. There's probably a lot of trends that have been in place, and it's just that the last 2 years have accelerated that. So we're seeing that employees for sure are reevaluating what they expect from their employers. So I think there's an inflection point now for, you asked how we should be thinking about it or what we should be doing. It's really helping to support the employer in addressing that need. If 67% of people are saying I'm reevaluating my relationship with my employer and what I expect from my employer, it's a lot of people, and there's definitely going to be an inflection point there. In terms of the Great Resignation, our survey and our research totally supports that. So 44% of people over the last year have either considered leaving or have left their job. That's a lot of people, and obviously something that most employers are dealing with. One of the things that also came out of that too, and as somebody who manages a team of people, we found that 55% of people, it wasn't even that they themselves were reevaluating. They just saw their colleagues and their peers doing that. So then they were like, wait a minute, maybe I should be doing that too. So there's a ripple effect.
Yes.
And definitely something that we should be thinking about how we're going to support financial professionals and, again, employers and really figuring out how to address that need.
Yeah. Ahmet, what are your thoughts?
I think employers are in the best position possible given the access they have to their employees, right? They know a lot about them. And I think there's an opportunity to learn more and to leverage what they learn to create, great outcomes for them. I think we're in a position now where, as an industry, we can help support those conversations through experience, education, things like that will help really close that gap in terms of, hey, I'm depending on my employer to provide me the resources I need. And we can help support the employers and both the participants in helping them achieve those goals.
Absolutely. Well, what I'd like to jump into next is kind of hear what our audience has to say about where they are in their retirement journey, frankly. So I'm going to ask my team to put up a graphic. And this graphic allows you, the viewer, to scan just like a regular QR code. A lot of us are used to this now when we go out to eat. Instead of a menu, you use your phone to scan the QR code. If you can scan that QR code, you're going to be prompted to jump right into this live poll. And we'll give it a few seconds here to allow everybody to jump in there. And we'd love you to go in, and we're going to be asking you 3 different poll questions during this hour broadcast. And the first one that we're going to be discussing is how your idea of retirement may or may not have changed, whether it be in the last 2 years, like we've talked about, the Great Resignation, or just in general. So we'll be very excited to hear what people have to say about that. So, before we jump into that, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Jackie, what do you think about that? Has your idea of retirement changed?
Yeah, for sure. I think for most people, they're really thinking about how they spend their day to day in all areas of life, whether that be work, life, personal life, hobbies, health. I think everyone's definitely reevaluating all aspects of life. And I think for us, in the last even less than 2 years, but just last couple months, right, the headline news has sort of pressed upon the fact that most people should reevaluate a lot of things, and particularly financially. And unfortunately, retirement fits squarely into that financial bucket. So I think everyone's really, really reevaluating. One thing, too, that our research found that for me is really, really important is that most folks, when thinking about their current job, new opportunities, it's not just about what they're getting paid. I think sometimes we shortchange people and think like, oh, it's just about the paycheck. It's just about money. But we're finding that just as many people, half and half, split down the middle, care about benefits, and they care about the total package, and they care about how they're treated, and they care about the values that they're aligning with. And we see people sort of, pursuing passions more and more within the research. So I think all of that comes back to this kind of reevaluation aspect of retirement and later years.
I want to hear your thoughts too, Ahmet, but let's show the poll. Let's jump into the poll and see what our audience has to say about this. Wow. Okay. So in terms of how your idea of retirement has changed, it looks like it's a tie between positively and no change at all, with 18% saying negatively. Ahmet, what do you see here?
I'm happy to see that more people are thinking about retirement positively than they are negatively. I think that given the level of information and at the rate at which we could deploy information, given our current technological capabilities, it's certainly putting things like retirement, or more broadly just financial things in light, and it's more accessible to people. So I think we are coming to a place where folks, it's not that they don't know anything about retirement or how to plan for it. They just need a little help, like I said earlier, right? And that's where the concept of it's more than the paycheck comes in. As you think about, what does my future look like if I take this job with this ABC firm or this XYZ firm? That's a big consideration. I look at myself. When I entered the workplace at 22, I admittedly was not thinking about how am I going to support myself at 65. But as the years go on, you get married, you have a couple of kids, you start thinking about how do I spend that next dollar in the best way, right? And that's where we can come into, as an industry, we can come to the table with good solutions.
I parallel that in many ways because, when I first entered the workforce, it was, family and those types of things. It was something I knew I wanted eventually, but it just was not in, at all. As I look down the road, I guess maybe now looking back, yes, it was something that was maybe a little more important than I should have. Should have put more effort into it. But at that time, it just was not a significant importance. And
it quickly creeps up on you.
It quickly creeps up on you because it wasn't until I got married and started having kids, and I've been with Pacific Life now about 8 years, and I remember when I took the role. It was like you say. I had my own business prior to Pacific Life, and healthcare, all these things I had to manage on my own. But to then now be able to come into a company where all these things were thought out, and there was the plan, and I didn't have to worry about that. It was such a relief, especially at a time when I was, we were having kids. I've now 4 kids, and even now, so fast forward these 8 years, it's a relief. It's very nice, and to be able to have that focus on the benefits also is wonderful.
And you both bring up a great point. I don't have children, but I have a partner, and what you're mentioning too is you're thinking about your later years in retirement as a unit, and I think that's also something to kind of consider too. Nobody's really coming to the table saying my retirement is just me. I have a great colleague that always talks about and reinforces that retirement is a household question and a household consideration. So I think what you guys just mentioned kind of validates that point for sure, that we have to think about benefits and solutions and engage the employee, understanding that there's a whole household behind them.
Yeah, of course, there's a quantitative aspect to retirement, right? It's the numbers matter. Are you prepared? How much do you need? How do we get you there? There's also a qualitative aspect, which is when I retire, I want to make sure I'm able to do the things with my children and grandchildren that I want to do. I don't want to be married to the office until I'm 75 or 80 years old because I have no other choice. And that's a piece that we need to think about, to your point, as this is a unit. This should be handled as a unit because it is a family. It's a family experience, right? Not just an individual.
And it speaks to the journey. Right, because when you experience it, I see it now, right? But when you're talking about it, it's hard to sometimes visualize that journey. But it truly is, for the folks that enter the workforce all the way until when they leave the workforce, and so many life experiences happen in between that time. Ahmet, you and I were speaking about this just yesterday. We're trying to juggle the soccer practices and the soccer games, and was this lunch made or whatever, and sometimes these important things, these important questions get kind of kicked down the road, and being able to create solutions, create resources that help pull people back into the focus that needs to happen. And with that said, I want to move on to our next topic here. So we're going to talk a little bit now how, in terms of focus, workers are more focused on financial independence than traditional retirement. But before we discuss with you, let's jump to our reel to see what people on the street have to say about this.
Well, first off, I don't trust the fact that the Social Security will be there for my generation. I'm 59, and so that's something that we've looked forward to. I was a stay-home mom, so I didn't really have a big retirement.
That end game, what's going to happen at the end? Am I going to be able to retire? Am I going to have what I want when I retire? Am I going to be still working at 70? I don't want to be working at 70.
To be able to live a comfortable lifestyle and provide for my kids and be present and not have to worry about working till I'm 70 or 80 or however long.
Well, you just have to have a little self-control and be a good saver and make your own little pension by stashing money.
I think one more thing too is like just your kids, them having a stable household financially and them being able to learn from you financially is huge.
Honestly, more like live in the moment, so I don't worry about that. So I guess not having it in my peripheral to be able to think about the long term, I'm usually pretty like short term thinking. So just trying to push against that by setting something up that I don't have to think about.
Wow, setting up something that you don't need to think about, somebody that maybe doesn't think about the long term, they're focused on the short term, just what we were talking about a moment ago. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, Jackie.
Yeah. I love this whole idea of thinking about things as everyone's an individual and, everyone has their own sort of path and journey. Just, thinking about the folks that we just heard from on the street, definitely a mixture of ages and backgrounds, et cetera. One of my very, very favorite things that we found from this research is a validation that people are not focused on retirement, sort of like this traditional concept of retirement. We use that word so much, and I think it's actually probably important for us as an industry to think about a different way to message it. And I have another colleague that always talks about retiring the word retirement, which I would absolutely love to do, because we see everyone has their own background, their own goals, and financial independence is actually the thing that people are focused in on. So 84% of employees that we survey said, actually, financial independence is my number one priority. And so if you think about that, that's awesome, but also a complex thing to sort of try to solve for.
Absolutely. Ahmet, what are your thoughts?
I agree completely. Financial independence is, it's been something that's been top of mind and discussed now, more recently over the last few years. Traditional retirement, as we knew it, or as our parents and grandparents know it, is ripe for innovation, right? So just getting to the point where we can help individuals feel financially independent, which then feeds into, hey, I can now stop working and I can do the things I want to do. That's important. And that's, as an industry, what we need to focus on. The other piece is the way people work, I think, is ripe for change. The pandemic has taught us that we could work from anywhere. Just given that we have the right access to the equipment and everything, we could be on meetings that are halfway across the world. So that dynamic, I think, is going to be a cultural shift on how people approach work and the things they prioritize. So I think that all is, feeds into financial independence and then ultimately preparing for retirement. I know we want to retire the word retirement, but I'll use that word for
come
today.
Up with something good. And if I could just
Please.
add something too, I think the folks that you found on the street were perfect for this, because the first woman mentioned sort of, if that traditional concept of retirement is relying on Social Security, well, she's saying like, I don't really feel great about that. Me and my peers were not sure if that's going to be around, which I know is a sort of wide felt concern. And then my favorite Cubs gentleman too is talking about creating your own personal pension, right? So if we think about that too as if everyone's thinking about their own idea of financial independence, there's a realization now, I think, from most folks that I have to figure out a way to fund this, and that funding that is going to be different for me than it's probably going to be for other folks.
Yeah, and as when we were producing those person on the street videos, it was really interesting to hear. We weren't able to use everybody that we filmed, but there was a bit of a concern. We heard from people that came into the workforce when they didn't think they'd have to worry about retirement, or perhaps there was that set pension, maybe a public worker or a city worker, et cetera. And we don't have that luxury. A lot of them have realized, in fact, some of the civil servants, even in the last 15 years, something that they did not have to really pay into as much, they've all of a sudden started to have to pay into more. And there is this shift. And I think there is that benefit that, okay, it may be a hard reality, but there's this opportunity because of this realization, right? An opportunity to provide education, to provide resources, to help people hone in on that focus, and to really provide them those resources that they need to live comfortably, right?
I think, what you're describing is the evolution of retirement, right? What we've done is we've come from a place where the plan sponsors and the companies have essentially shifted the liability back onto the individual. I think the data we've seen over the last 15 to 20 years tells us that that's not exactly working in the best way. And how do we create situations and solutions that take that liability back off of, or the burden back off of the individual, to help them create something similar to, like our Cubs friend said, their own pension. The other piece I want to mention too is he made another great comment in one of the earlier videos where he said, hey, you spend a little, you save a little, right? The other piece we need to be aware of in retirement is not just potentially not having enough, it's also managing the spending, right? And it's saying, hey, I don't know how long this bucket of assets is going to last. And if I underspend, my quality of life is not great. And if I overspend, my quality of life is not great. How do I get to a point where I know what I need to spend, and how do I do it efficiently? And I think that's where, as an industry too, we could certainly help out.
Yeah. Great point here, and we're going to get into our next poll question, but I want to reach out to our audience and remind you that we do have a moderated Q&A. So in LinkedIn, you'll see an opportunity to put in a question, and we will get to those questions at the end of today's broadcast, but I just wanted to take a moment to encourage you to throw a question in if you have one. And what I'd like to do is jump into our next polling question here. So if we can throw the graphic back up, those that may have joined us a little late, we have a live polling feature for this event today. If you can just scan that QR code with your device, you'll jump right in. Those that have already scanned it, you can just head right back to that browser window, and you'll see the new question pop up, which is, what is the biggest roadblock to financial well-being that you encounter? What is the biggest financial roadblock? Ahmet, let's talk with you. You were talking about some roadblocks a moment ago, but share with me, perhaps on a personal level, through the course of your employment evolution, did you encounter any roadblocks?
I think I made a comment before about where do you best spend that next dollar that comes in, right? We all have a lot to worry about. We have to worry about just our everyday living, making sure we pay our mortgage, our rent, our car payments, our utilities, making sure we fund our health insurance, making sure we fund our life insurance. So these are all things that, they're this moment in time expenses that need to be paid. So it's hard for someone when they're thinking about those things to also say, hey, I also need to fund for something that may be 30 to 40 years in the future, right? So I think that's shifting the mindset to have that more long-term view of what it means to start thinking about retirement today, preparing individuals through, like we said, education that's appropriate for that point in time based on where they're at in their lives. And that changes over time as somebody's situation changes. You get married, you have a few kids, now you have your kids in college, now your kids are getting married. Next thing you know, you're 5 to 10 years away from retirement. It's not a one size fits all. So creating an experience, creating a journey for these individuals that goes along with them through these experiences is the best way, I think, to overcome some of those challenges around financial wellness.
And Jackie, I want to hear your feedback on that too, but let's jump over to our poll and see what our audience members have to say. So, so the biggest roadblock that our audience members feel is preventing financial well-being. Debt, 24%, lack of retirement education, 6%, 12%. From a financial guidance standpoint, but all of the above, high number. Jackie, what do you have to say about this?
I think just reacting to that and also building upon what Ahmet mentioned too is one of the challenges I think most people feel today, and I know I feel this myself, is an accurate view of the full picture, right? So you mentioned kind of next best dollar. Part of that comes from having a clear view of what your full picture is, and then maybe even getting some recommendations or sort of, pings to say like, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? One of the things we asked survey respondents was around comfort level with sharing data. So much of what we're trying to solve for as an industry, or even so much that we, kind of think about in our day-to-day life, there's a data component there. You mentioned earlier about the employer being a great opportunity and inflection point of trust. So we wanted to ask respondents to say, hey, how comfortable are you sharing more information with your employer? Most of them said, 63% said, I'd share some information, some basic information like my name, where I live, et cetera. But once you start adding on extra things like outside held accounts, more personal health information, et cetera, folks were a little bit hesitant. There's a little bit of a preference, 55% said, I would share more information if I could get more personalized benefits, et cetera, versus 45 who are like, actually just give me what everyone else has, and I would prefer not to. So I think what you mentioned too about how do I spend that next best dollar? How do I think about this more holistically? My experience of kind of figuring out what's my full picture look like? What should I be doing that I'm not thinking about? We work in this industry, so I feel like, we're more tuned in than probably most people, but still it's hard to kind of figure out what to do next. The challenge for us as an industry is to figure out how to get folks, I think, more comfortable with the data share, because that's the only way we solve for true financial independence for each individual person, which is going to look completely different across the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, just to make a light joke out of it, the 65% that share their name and address, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, don't we need that to pay you, right?
Exactly.
You need a paycheck, right? So we need that information. But absolutely, I think, getting individuals to a point where they're comfortable sharing that data. I don't think we realize just how much data we share on a daily basis with the everyday things that we interact with. Our Amazons, our Netflix, any other subscription services. And the reason why we're comfortable doing that is because the output that we get is something that is relevant to us. Hey, you've been watching this show. Do you want to watch this? It may be in your, maybe of an interest to you. Hey, you bought this pair of pants today. Would you like to buy these because they're similar? And these are all things that we look at and we say, hey, that's great. They know me, and they know me because they have these data points.
Or in my case on Amazon, you bought these diapers yesterday. Try these.
Exactly.
Try these diapers.
Exactly.
With kids, and I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, we're all just conditioned now to be, whether it's Netflix, Amazon, Disney Plus, whatever it is, and there are so many other platforms, but Amazon in particular, constantly serving us, even as we move to the checkout cart. Right? You may be interested because you spent 5 seconds. I mean, that's, behind the scenes is because we see you looking at this, we want to serve you this. Maybe you'll be interested in this based on your purchasing history. But it is interesting. Both of you talking about data and those predictive analytics that we've talked about in the last couple of days. And I mean, in terms of the future of that, Ahmet, what do you think as it pertains to the financial industry?
Yeah, I think it's very important. And I think we're going to get to a point where it's likely going to be table stakes, right? Because what's a good outcome for you is going to be different than what's a good outcome for Jackie or what's a good outcome for myself. The only way that we know that is if we know about the individual. And I think that the future, and there may be some folks that disagree, but the future of not just retirement, but financial services in general is going to be dependent on how much do we know about somebody and how much can we help them based on what we know.
And I think, just to tie that part, put an underline under it too, is the ask is there for sure. The expectation is going to be there because of the Netflix, Amazons, and that expectation that it exists everywhere else. So if there's a hesitation, like I mentioned earlier, we have to figure out a way to solve for it. And a lot of that comes through education because 68% of respondents said, I want my employer to recommend strategies to me based on my own goals. So I want my employer to tell me, Jackie, what I should be doing. Well, okay, we're going to need some more data. And if you're not comfortable with that data, we're going to have to figure out a way to make you comfortable through education and, balancing that.
It's like if you go to your doctor and your doctor takes you in and says, hey, the last person had a cold, so I'm going to give you this to take, right? That's not the best approach, right? What are your symptoms? How can I help you?
Yeah.
And that's how, that's the approach that we should be taking. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned education, and I'd like to maybe dive into that a little bit because it is so important. And we're talking about, just very practical scenarios here that make great sense. Of course, like why in the doctor scenario you just laid out there. But as it pertains to our personal information with finances and things, it does get a little sticky. But we actually got some good feedback from our person on the street interviews, folks talking about where they are in terms of how they feel or where they are with education that they've been provided. Even some of the anxiety and feelings that folks have when they think of the word retirement. I'd love to jump in to that right now. Let's check out this next person on the street video and hear what people have to say as it pertains to education and well-being in retirement.
Yeah, I think that with the economy, how things are going right now, cost of living is just ridiculous right now. Gas prices, I mean, everything. There's a lot of people that are concerned about that. And I think that it does definitely keep people up at night, for sure.
I mean, I think it can be, stress takes a toll on your body, it takes a toll on your relationships, takes a toll on how you're able to care for yourself. And so honestly, you can manage your stress, then you can have more of a holistic, healthy lifestyle. So I think it really could permeate every part of your life.
Just trying to think about what are inflation-proof items that we could acquire now while we have money to, help us sustain ourselves in the future. I think it just keeps you up at night. It doesn't let you enjoy your life, the simple things, just like this, sitting out here and watching the sunset. I think financial stress interferes with that.
So I think if we can talk about it more, that will help. And I think it's important because everyone deserves a retirement. Everyone deserves, they've been working for, years and years. They deserve some time off.
And I think, unfortunately, unless you do your own research, you're left with what your parents taught you. And for a lot of us, it's not much.
I wish they taught financial literacy in high school, you know what I mean? And even in college, and make us more prepared for the future. So yeah, having those resources early on, I think, is a good educational tool for everyone to have. And I wish I had it earlier, for sure.
And the more and more you go on, you hear that somebody retires and then they pass away. So it's just a matter of staying busy, staying healthy. And I'm fortunate I have a partner to share my retirement with and grow old with.
So, real interesting. We hear a lot about, I wish I had more opportunities for financial literacy. This is keeping me up at night. Or even the gentleman at the end here that's excited just to, live with his partner and enjoy life in retirement. Real great guy. Gave some great answers there when we were out filming in Chicago. But, what do you think about that? Jackie, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what we just watched.
I think what is becoming so clear to us in our industry is that you can't separate some of these topics, right? So you can't say, oh, here's your financial life and here's your physical life or personal life, et cetera. They're so intertwined. One of the concepts we've gone back to in our survey is this concept of wellness, which I know is sort of an overused word, but it's a very important one. And what we asked about was, if you think about three areas, so your physical well-being, your mental well-being, and your financial well-being, how do those rank in importance? And unsurprisingly, everyone said they're just as important. It's a three-legged stool for me, and folks feel the least in control of their financial health. So you might say, oh, okay, great, let's just solve for the financial piece of it, but and we should, but we're valuing kind of the impact that one of those areas might impact the other ones. And we saw that in the person on the street, right? People are stressed out on something that is in one of those buckets. So financially, something's not going well, so they physically feel stressed and they mentally feel stressed. So for us to solve for the financial piece of it, or help employers solve for the financial piece of it, is going to help them across the full spectrum of wellness and well-being. And it's really something that's quite urgent for us to figure out and solve for.
Yeah, I agree. Ahmet, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the sad part is in many of those situations, as we've seen on the person on the street videos, it's through no fault or control of their own, right? These people want to do the right thing. They want to make sure that they're adequately prepared for retirement. They want to understand how to go about it. And we just don't necessarily have all the resources that they should, that should be out there to help them get to that point.
Do you know what's so interesting too, particularly in that last segment? You don't hear the word retirement a lot. And I would argue that as an industry, we've kind of done a pretty good job of reinforcing the fact that you should save for retirement. I think nobody would argue that you should save for retirement. What I'm hearing so much from those folks and within our survey too is that they're like, actually help me with other things. Like, how about debt, and how about financial planning tools, and how do I think about saving for my kids' college, right? So
or something as simple as an emergency fund.
Emergency fund, et cetera. So, and, we heard about literacy, and we heard about, one of the gentlemen basically explained what the not having access to advice is. They're sort of left to do their own research. So I think thinking about even just the financial picture as not just retirement, and obviously goes back to that financial independence versus retirement thing too, it's a full spectrum of financial support and resources that we should be thinking about.
The one gentleman in there that resonated a little bit with me is, we need to get that information or that education from somewhere, because many of us, we didn't learn that from our parents. We may have been given so many other great life lessons, and been put in great, situations for experience as we grow older. But in terms of that financial preparedness, something as simple as, let's open a bank account, and you're going to save this amount. You can spend this amount. Maybe give away this amount or whatever, donate, but. We that's just not something that is, unfortunately, with many people, ingrained at an early age.
And let's think about this from a generational perspective, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about a generation of parents that likely had some form of a pension or something that was, coming in their direction. So maybe the thought of, again, having to take that risk on themselves to make sure or self-insure their retirement was not there, right? Because they knew they had Social Security and they had a pension. We are coming into a generation of workers that are nearing retirement now, or will be in the next 10 years or so, that won't have access or to those types of those pension type solutions. So I think our thinking that those solutions would always be around probably inhibited us from being a little bit more proactive on, hey, let's start educating people. Now we know it's on us, right? The liability is on the individual to make sure that they create a sustainable retirement. And that's when we're starting to realize, I need help, I need education, I need resources, help me out.
Well, as we saw from our folks on the street, there are a lot of emotions, a lot of the feels. People were really bringing up a lot of personal scenarios or things that they wish they would have. And what I'd like to do is turn the focus to our audience and learn more from our audience right now through our polling. And I'm going to ask my team to put up the graphic here. If you can go ahead and use your device. If you're new to the show, you can scan that QR code. It'll pop you right into our live polling with Poll EV. And if you're already in the Poll EV system, you'll see the next question, which deals with the emotions of retirement. How do you feel when you think of the word retirement? You have a couple options in there: anxiety, fear, excitement. Jackie, not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. When you think of retirement, even as somebody that's been in the industry so long with so much experience, what do you think of when you hear the word that we're not supposed to say, retirement? But when you think of life after work, what do you think? How do you feel?
I'll be vulnerable and say anxiety for sure. I think, one of the things that I experienced in my financial life was a lot of student loan debt, which thankfully is behind me, and actually is one of the things we asked in the research too, where 75% of people said I would have made different education choices if I had known.
75%.
75%. So I'm in that bucket for sure. So I think there's some anxiety there that, I'm behind and, I need to catch up. And thankfully I, again, work in the industry and understand how important it is. So I'm probably more plugged in than most people. But I think that there's probably a lot of people that share that same sort of anxiety, or they're still dealing, to your point, about other pieces of the puzzle, and they're not sure sort of how to piece all those things together or where to focus their energy first before getting to something else that's kind of longer term, like retirement.
Ahmet, I want to hear what you have to say, but let's show the poll first, and then we can discuss. Let's see what our audience has to say. Okay, look at that. Wow. So we've got a tie for anxiety and all of the above. So good to see that we don't see much fear going, okay, nope, it's changing. That's the beauty of a live poll. Okay, so we do have all the above is the clear winner. Ahmet, what do you think about that? What comes to mind when you think of that?
I was going to say all the above.
All the above.
When you think about retirement, you say to yourself, hey, I'm gonna wake up tomorrow and I don't have to go to work. That's great. And then you also say, I don't have to go to work. I've been doing that for a long time. I think of my father, who's worked his entire life. The first day we had to push him to retire because that's all he knew. So I think you're going to get certainly that gamut of mixed emotions. That's certainly how I feel about it. The fear of making sure I am going to have a sustainable retirement, the fear of staying healthy in retirement. So I get to enjoy it. The joy of being able to do the things I want to do, and the anxiety of the unknown.
So. For me, I would say all of the above, and also for me too, not wanting to be a burden on my children, not wanting to have them, plan for my retirement, or even when I get hopefully a ripe old age, and I may need additional care, or my wife and I may need additional care. I don't want my kids to have to worry about that. I want to be able to set everything up to where we're comfortable, and the kids can live their own life and not have to. I mean, hopefully they want to still talk to us after they're grown and out of the house. But I think everybody has their own story.
Sure.
And everybody has, like I said, that we've talked about, their own journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that whole concept of all of the above, it kind of marries nicely to the concept of wellness too. So if it really is not just one thing, it's many things, and kind of balancing and trying to solve for wellness across the full spectrum, so important. And I think, for me, the takeaway there is that we see that the employer can play a huge role in that. So it's not just about, hey, here's a paycheck and, here's a retirement plan, good luck. But, we find that workers are saying, no, I'm looking to my employer for help with creating a budget or figuring out how to pay down debt. So there's more that employers could be doing, and it's on us to help them with the tools and resources and solutions that they need to do so.
Absolutely.
And this is, as an industry, this is where we're at a really big inflection point.
Yeah.
If we look at the ecosystem of players that play a role in making sure that we deliver these solutions and these outcomes to these participants, we have a really big opportunity to make sure that we can all partner together in the right ways, and do the right thing by the participant. Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters.
And that is all that matters at the end of the day. And this has been excellent. And I want to hear last thoughts before we get into questions. But I want to reach out to our audience once again. I want to encourage you. You have this option here in LinkedIn to add your questions that we'd love to pose to the panel here. So feel free to add in your questions. I see some from Doug and Sue and even Dylan. So we'll get to those in a few moments here. But I want to ask last thoughts from our panel here. Jackie?
So there's one stat in the research that's my absolute favorite, and I always make the joke that I'd love to put it on a T-shirt and get it out to the mass public. But I think it does a really nice job of summarizing some of the key findings and really what we're hearing from U.S. workers across the board. And that's that 84% of U.S. workers are saying, in these uncertain times, I just want to be able to count on my employer to provide the best benefits to me without having to think about it. So I think that just gets so much to the core of the role that the employer can play and what employees are looking for when they're evaluating and reevaluating these opportunities. And again, a huge opportunity for us as an industry to help support employers in doing just that.
Ahmet?
Yeah, I'm a ditto to everything Jackie said. And I'll just mimic some of my prior comments. And that's where our ability to partner across the ecosystem comes in is a really important thing.
So let's jump right into the questions here. So we have a question from Susan, and Susan says, the industry has done a lot of great work creating resources for participants, but what can be done to better leverage the content for participants?
Such a good question. I think what we're finding and the feedback that we're getting from employers is it's not just to create solutions or resources or tools and just hope that people will use them. It's really being proactive in creating an engagement strategy and figuring out how to engage employees and participants or wherever they are, right? So whether that's digitally, in person, et cetera, and really making that a part of the engagement, being very diligent about how you get those tools and resources out to folks.
Excellent. And we have a question for you, Ahmet. Now, this is something we did discuss earlier in the broadcast, but I think there's a lot we could still talk about it. But, what are your thoughts on using data to streamline the participant experience? We have that from Doug.
That's a great question, Doug. And I could certainly talk for hours on that, but I know we only have a few minutes here. So I think it's one of the most important things that we could solve as an industry. One, how do we enable participants to provide that data? How do we get them comfortable providing that data? Once we do that, how do we use that data in the right way? And that data is going to drive a lot of the financial well-being, right? Not just retirement, not just life after work, but how could we use that data to help individuals with what they're dealing with today, so it makes what they're dealing with in the future, which is life after work, just a little bit easier.
We have another question from Dylan, and I'll let either of you grab this one here. So Dylan asks, what strategies can one seek for, financial independence? And, we talked about even just something as simple as an emergency fund, starting there. Maybe Jackie, you want to?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer this with one of the findings we didn't get to, which is we asked employees and participants who responded to the survey if your employer could provide some benefit that they don't currently or improve upon, what would that look like? And to me, that's a tremendous punch list that any employer can think about in creating, enhancing benefits, reevaluating benefits. And to me, it also is a great punch list of thinking about, personally, if I'm an employee, how am I going to engage back with my benefit offering? But things like access to an emergency savings account, access to a health savings account, access to something that will turn into an income stream in the future, contributions to pay down personal debt, contributions to pay down student loan debt, et cetera. So that punch list is there. And I think for any employee who wants to do some due diligence and kind of evaluate the benefits that they currently have access to that maybe they're not using, back to Susan's question, but also any employer who's really thinking about revamping what they're offering to employees.
We talked about this. Dylan actually has a follow-up here. Thank you, Jackie, for that. And Ahmet, I'll pose this to you. I know what I would say having kids, but we talked about this a little bit. What are some of the psychological or wellness opportunities one could do to prepare to retire? And start with education. How about that?
Education is key, right? We need to help participants understand the value of what they're working towards. Once you can get a participant to understand the value, then it's a matter of, okay, how do I put this plan in motion? Right? So now we go from education to experience, from experience to enacting on the strategy, right? Once you're close to retirement. That's where the enablement piece comes in, right? We also, as an overarching theme, we need to create an enablement strategy to make sure we get folks to actually use every single one of those things. So I think it starts with education. And again, it's not a one-size-fits-all education. We have to meet people, to Jackie's point, in terms of where they are, whether that's where they are in their lives or their career. And that's where we should start.
Well, wonderful. This has been such a great opportunity to sit with the two of you and discuss, lifetime income solutions and the landscape, and listen to what folks have to say on the street, and also hear from our audience as well. So, Jackie, Ahmet, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Absolutely. And would you come back?
Please.
Okay, great. Really, really grateful for your time this morning, flying on out and making time. And to our audience, I want to take an opportunity to thank you for engaging with us today during this live session. And I want to encourage you to head over to YouTube, Spotify, and Audible, and like and subscribe more wave strength content from Pacific Life so you can stay current with new content as we make it available. Again, thanks so much for joining us, and please have a great day.
This has been another episode of The Wave Strength, presented by Pacific Life. Don't forget to catch us on YouTube and make sure to subscribe. Although this is presented by Pacific Life, the opinions and views expressed are those of the hosts and participants and do not necessarily reflect Pacific Life's views on any of the topics discussed. Pacific Life is a product provider. It is not a fiduciary and therefore does not give advice or make recommendations regarding insurance or investment products. Pacific Life, its affiliates, its distributors, and respective representatives do not provide any employer-sponsored qualified plan administrative services or impartial advice about investments, and do not act in a fiduciary capacity for any plan. Pacific Life refers to Pacific Life Insurance Company, Newport Beach, California, and its affiliates, including Pacific Life and Annuity Company. Insurance products are issued by Pacific Life Insurance Company in all states except New York, and in New York by Pacific Life and Annuity Company. Product availability and features may vary by state. Each insurance company is solely responsible for the financial obligations accruing under the products it issues. This was recorded on October 18th, 2022.